Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the Oxford Africa Conference today, Saturday. Being an African conference, I'm sure we did expect a bit of delays. We know how business is done in Africa. But yeah, so we're running a bit late, but I'm glad that everyone is here to get us started. So the founder and managing director of DLA Energy, Linda Mabena Olanguju, welcome to Oxford. Ladies and gentlemen, we're glad to have you here this Saturday to the Oxford Africa Conference. This conference actually started last week on Friday when we hosted the President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, who had a pre-engagement with us to set the tone for this conference. So the conference this year is Beyond the Rhetoric, Catalyzing an Era of Concrete Action. And having started the conference last year, we continued this conference yesterday when we had two very powerful keynote speeches delivered in the afternoon. First, by the First Lady of the Republic of Namibia, Madam Monica Gengos, who delivered a very, very powerful speech on leadership in Africa. And I just want to touch on a couple of things that she mentioned on. The first being, how do we develop strong institutions in Africa that hold our leaders accountable? She said, we need to have the strong checks and balances to hold our leaders accountable in Africa. But for us to do that, we need to have very active and engaged political institutions, get the youth involved in leadership, and that was the challenge that she gave to all of us here. What she mentioned was, being here at Oxford provides us with a privilege and an opportunity to engage with academia, utilize the resources, but also the intellectual power that we can bring to our continent and effect change. But the one thing that we have to be cognizant of is understanding the context on the ground. How and what do we need to communicate for us to effect change? Going back to the continent and trying to effect change, thinking or utilizing the models that are currently operational or have worked in other continents might not work because we've got that spirit of Ubuntu, for starters, but more importantly, the context on the ground is not uniform across every country. She mentioned of issues that work in Nigeria that might not work in other countries, that might not work in Namibia. The other issue that she also mentioned was we need to take the challenge in Africa. At the moment, there's a lot of great things going on. She mentioned of a couple of issues in Namibia, like setting the tone by the Namibia ruling government, ruling party, which set itself a target to make sure that 50% of the leaders in government in the party are women. But that also has been able to translate into the government. If the strong parties or leadership within these countries are not able to set the tone and the leadership, this might not actually translate into government. In the afternoon, having set the tone, we had our innovation fair, and we were privileged to have Sidi Glynn, the president and founder of the president and CEO of the USA Development Foundation. He talks about the challenges and opportunities of doing business in Africa across the board: energy, agriculture, the technology sector, and the role that philanthropy can play in business in Africa. We were also privileged to have 5 innovators from Africa that preached their ideas, and I was privileged, and you might agree for those that were here yesterday, to see the amount of innovation and the quality of innovation that's going on the ground. I think the one thing that occurred to me was there is really, really good things going on and innovation going on in Africa, and it is up to us when we are here in Oxford, or up to the business sector, to identify these types of innovators and bring them to the fore and offer them these opportunities to show what they're capable of. And I'm really, really excited about this afternoon as we get to hear about who the winners among those 5 will be able to walk away with the prizes. In the evening, we also had the privilege of having a keynote speech by the former Chief Justice of Ghana, Mrs. Georgina Woods. She talked about three main key things. First, being the issue of leadership and holding our leaders accountable using the Constitution and the role of the judicial system in government to hold accountable the different arms of the government. She also talks about how do we move the role of the opposition in holding these leaders accountable, but more importantly, the role of the civil society and us as activists on the ground. She gave an example of Malawi, which is where I come from, I'm not being biased, whereby in 2002, they tried to change the constitution, and there was mass activism by individuals and civil society, which sort of pushed back the change of the constitution. In that very same vein, today we are going to continue the conversation and we're going deep into what do we actually need to do on the ground for us to move beyond the rhetoric. And today we're going to tackle some of the main issues of feminism. First, feminism. Secondly, LGBTI community. And lastly, mental health, which we feel are some of the three key issues that are rarely addressed on the continent. And to get us started, we have the privilege of welcoming Mrs. Linda Mabena Olagunju, who is going to get introduced by one of my colleagues, Julia Standish-White. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Oxford Africa Conference.
Everyone. My name is Julia Standish-White. I'm a South African and I'm part of this year's conference committee. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's first keynote speaker, a woman who embodies our conference theme of Beyond the Rhetoric with her fierce passion and determination for bettering the African continent. Linda Mabena Olagunju is the founder and managing director of DLO Energy Resources Group, an independent power producer currently operating one of Africa's largest wind farms. The company also has a portfolio of solar PV projects in Africa. Its objective is to become Africa's largest black female-owned IPP on the continent. In 2017, Mrs. Mabena Olagunju was listed in the Choiseul 100 Africa Economic Leaders for Tomorrow. She's also been featured on the front cover of Forbes Africa and has been recognized by ESI as one of the 50 most influential people in the African power sector. In 2014, she was featured on Oprah's Power List amongst the 20 most powerful women in Africa. She is the only African currently sitting on the selection committee of the Zayed Sustainability Prize. She holds an LLB from UCT and an LLM from the University of Aberdeen. She's also an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa. We are delighted that Linda is here today, and we look forward to starting off the day with this key conversation. Please join me in welcoming this is Linda Mabena Olagunju.
Thank you for that introduction. I think you forgot to mention she's an active Twitter account holder and Instagrammer. I think those are the more pertinent achievements there, but I'm joking. Thank you very much, and it gives me great pleasure to be here with you guys today. So let me start off with the formal part of my speech, which is to start by saying good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, the program directors, the student body of Oxford, all protocol observed. When I was asked to give this talk this morning, I actually wanted to say something like, today I'm going to speak from my heart. And then I remembered my friend Wana, who's a writer, she's a Nigerian writer, and she said to me, nothing irks her more than when she goes to a conference or a presentation and the speaker starts by saying, I'm going to speak from my heart, because it implies that that person has not adequately prepared. And they're just winging it. So I want to say to those of you who paid heavily for your tickets today, I will speak from my very well-researched and prepared heart. And I hope that you approve. I would like to take a moment and dedicate this address to the late, great Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. without whom there would be no Nelson Mandela as we know him. History has been unkind to strong African women who do not toe the imaginary lines, and especially those who do not march to the beat of their oppressors. I think the theme for this year's discussion is well timed for a number of reasons, because I too am dealing with many great conflicts in my own journey as an entrepreneur in a field traditionally reserved for white men. I'm constantly plagued by the discomfort of navigating this world as a conscientized Black person who can no longer pretend not to see the tools of oppression everywhere around me in various forms. One example that springs to mind is the dinner we had last night at Rhodes' house. I felt deeply conflicted and angered that we as a continent inadvertently are celebrating a man who stole our land, facilitated the killing of our people, because we cannot refuse his money. Even more disturbing for me was seeing the image of Utatu Mandela next to this man who stood opposed to everything that the Mandela legacy is about. No matter how we package it, it remains a bitter pill to swallow. But it is a necessary discomfort. We need to ask ourselves and feel as African business leaders, what are we doing to unbundle this legacy? In a world where great business leaders like Dangote, Dinubu, Mutsipe, and ourselves exist, it is a huge representation of our own failure. So my anger is not only towards Rhodes, it's towards ourselves. So I will begin with a challenge to myself and to other business leaders that if we want Rhodes to truly fall, let us put our money behind it. Let us put our money together so that our children no longer need to knock on the door of their oppressor. We are capable, we can do it, and it must be done in our lifetime. It saddens me to have to start my talk with this discussion point, but I couldn't stand here and be disingenuous. It also saddens me that whilst the rest of the world is debating the fourth industrialization, the Industrial Revolution, such as mining minerals from space, replacing human labor with robots, we sit in our so-called dark continent in 2018, still trying to fight polio, still trying to stop malaria, still trying to provide clean drinking water, feed our hungry people, and somewhere in between that, we're trying to electrify our continent, which remains literally in the dark. How can we be part of the fourth industrial revolution when we have not even participated in the first? We live in a continent where 68% of our population is without power. According to the International Energy Agency, that translates to over 600 million people on the continent without power. And if you don't believe them, let's look at real facts. Take Nigeria as an example, a country of over 200 million people, only 7,000 megawatts connected to the national grid. 200 million people, 7,000 megawatts. Juxtapose it to South Africa. 50 million people, over 50,000 megawatts. Would it surprise you if I told you that the entire continent does not have more electricity than Spain, a small European country? The entire African continent only has as much power as Spain. When we do this comparison of where the world is and where we are, one can't help but say, enough Africa, which way forward? I hope to share with you today some of my ideas around what some of the issues and my ideas around solving them would be. And the focus of my discussion would be predominantly around the business sector. Whenever Africa is discussed in the context of business, we talk about its potential, whether it be in the context of the excavation of its mineral resources or accessing its consumer market. We have all heard the great statistics around Africa being the final frontier for business opportunities. Initially, when I used to read the great studies by McKinsey and business articles in Business Day and Financial Times, I used to smile with pride and excitement. That was until I began to experience and unpack for myself what these statistics actually meant for me as a Black African woman in this space. Most African countries achieved liberation in the 1950s. South Africa was late to the party. We only held our first democratic elections on the 27th of April in 1994. I remember at the time standing in the lines with my parents who were voting. So I wasn't obviously eligible to vote. And I remember the huge expectation that came with that day, that finally we were going to be liberated and this would translate into real change and would be the happy rainbow nation that the world saw us as. Somewhere in that euphoria, we believed that this too meant that the dire economic conditions under which we were living would somehow disappear, that we would be elevated not only politically but economically. The labor force thought that it would be able to access equitable labor markets. Black entrepreneurs believed that they would begin to access sectors of their economy from which they had been excluded. And the people believed that they would gain back the land that had been stolen from them. But this was not to be the case. Thomas Sankara aptly stated, "He who feeds you controls you." I will repeat, he who feeds you controls you. On paper, we were being told that freedom had come, but our stomachs remained empty, our children poorly educated, our workers dying in dark mines extracting minerals that they did not own. Our mothers remained cleaning the floors of their previous oppressors. South Africa's tale was not unique. From Cape to Cairo, Nairobi to Lagos, the stories of post-liberty remained the same. It remained tales of dreams deferred, unrealized potential, and the rhetoric around how we could be great again. We have become so disillusioned by our failed independence that instead of putting together concrete strategies on how to rebuild our continent, take back our land, and reclaim our economies, we sit comatose. We sit in a comatose state, operating in mediocrity, accepting crumbs as achievements, and allowing ourselves to be treated as outsiders in our own homes and on our own land and on our own continent. We have all sat around dinner tables in various parts of the world and dissected the problems facing the continent, whether it be poor leadership resulting in poor infrastructure, poor education, a failed healthcare system, which inevitably leads to the brain drain. Some amongst us have also discussed the solutions. So an example being Mo Ibrahim, who has come up with the prize for African leadership to encourage good African leadership and to encourage our leaders to leave when their time is up. Others, like Fred Swaneker, have tried to address the issue of poor education through the creation of the African Leadership Academy. And in terms of business, we've produced a number of great business people, the likes of Dangote, Mutsipo, Masiwa, Ali Kija, and the like. Yet in spite of these pockets of excellence, the continent remains lagging behind its global counterparts. So why is it that we have not actualized our true potential? There are a number of reasons and answers around this question, but I choose to focus on one aspect: our mindset, our psychology, how we view ourselves as a people. I know in Africa, once you start to talk about mind and psychology, people start to look for the nearest cleansing ceremony in the village, and they start to take you to church for prayer, and I'm joking. I know mental health is a very serious issue, so I really am joking. But truly, let us heed the insightful warning from Steve Bantu Biko when he said, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And I ask, are we proud of who we are as Africans? Do we have a sense of self-worth? Do we believe that we can create value in the world? And over and above just supplying raw materials and cheap labor, do we believe we are contributing to the world? Do we believe that we can dominate globally in a business setting? This may seem like a soft issue, and I want to boldly state that this is actually the fundamental reason why we haven't reached our true potential as a continent. We have this inherent self-belief that anything that is made in Africa, especially when it comes to the areas of technology and innovation, is inferior. I want to take the energy sector in South Africa as a prime example of this. South Africa's renewable energy program is considered amongst the top 10 for investment in the world. A fact I used to state proudly until I too began to truly unpack what this meant for me as a black woman operating in this space. So under the program, the project company that takes on the work of developing a power project, up to 60% of that project company can be foreign owned. 40% should be owned by locals. There are very stringent requirements around the technology partners. And in particular, the technology partner needs to have a proven track record and operational assets in different parts of the world for large-scale projects for a certain number of time. And the result of this is that we do not have any African technology partners in this program and anywhere else on the continent. So what you see is that the African partners are the developers of the project, but the technology being used still remains foreign. This has resulted in a number of multinationals taking up equity stakes in these companies with the main objective of flooding the African market with their technology, maximizing their return on investment, and exiting when it's no longer beneficial. When you read the agreements, the technology remains protected under intellectual property laws, meaning there can never be a real skills transfer to Africa. We will remain dependent on them for technology. So let us ask ourselves, what does this translate to our growth and development in real terms? Are we building industries or merely building a reliance on foreign-owned technology? The key issue is around control of this intellectual property. Are we creating an enabling environment to foster the possibility of African-owned technology partners one day providing the technology for these projects? In short, the answer is no. Our leadership has failed to identify this as a fundamental gap in their policies. When we look at Business Insider's list of the top 10 richest people in the world, it is dominated by the owners of tech and innovation companies. And there is not a single African on that list, with the exception of Elon Musk, who is a South African, but now identifies as an American. The fact that our pride and joy, Dangote, is not even on the top 50 was a wake-up call for me. Because it was clear to me that the future business leaders were going to be those who owned interests in technology and innovation. And what did that mean for us? So for me, having seen that the fourth industrial revolution is coming, I believe strongly we should be investing as a continent in technology and innovation. Also, African consumers should be giving our products a chance to encourage investment in the sector. We need to stop seeing our products as inferior. That being said, we do have pockets of technology and innovation success stories on the continent. For example, the growth of M-Pesa. However, scalability on a global stage remains an issue because most of our technology and innovations remain region or country specific, which is why M-Pesa has performed very poorly in a country like South Africa, which has one of the most sophisticated banking systems on the continent. So whilst it worked in East Africa, it hasn't worked well in South Africa. So we need to start creating things that not only apply to ourselves as a continent and our countries, but something that is going to have a global impact. Besides the matter of technology and innovation, I also began to question our ambition as business people. Africa is littered with a number of privately owned multinationals with key stakes in our economies. But have you ever wondered why we don't have African companies owning key stakes in European and American soil? Not even Dangote owns. That, to me, made me reflect. Are we comfortable with just being the best in Africa? So earlier when my bio was read, that used to be my status. It used to be DLO is trying to be the #1 on the African continent. In 2018, it changed. We're trying to be #1 globally. And we have started our strategy to take over. The time has come. The time has come for African-owned multinationals to start dominating the global stage. The time has come for Dangote, DLO, etc., to rise to the levels of ExxonMobil. It is possible. We are capable, if only we believe in ourselves. There are many more business examples I could give to highlight my point, but I'd rather open it up for dialogue because I think I've raised the key pertinent issues I wanted us to discuss today. And really, for me, the crux of it all is how we view ourselves as a people. I'd like to end off by quoting a verse from a song by Simpiwe Dana. I'll say it in Xhosa first, and then I'll translate because I understand not everyone understands that language. But I think it is so powerful when it is said in our African language. But I will say it again in English. It's from a song called Inkomo. Zemka inkomo zethu, zemka ngondiva bethu, ndiva bethu ba ngcono kunathi. Zemka inkomo zethu, zemka nondiva bethu, ndiva bethu ba ngcono kunathi. Soyeka nini ukuzizonda, Africa. There goes our wealth, there goes the wealth of our nation, there goes the wealth of our continent. It is being taken by those who have told us that they are better than us. When will we stop hating ourselves, Africa? When will we stop hating ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that powerful keynote speech to open our day today. And now, in the spirit of this conference, we're going to have two very strong, powerful women, Noxolo Ntaka, who is going to moderate the Q&A conversation with Linda. Noxolo and Linda, over to you.
I'm like really thirsty.
Linda, thank you so much. I think, as my colleague mentioned, this keynote address that you provided is quite critical and quite important to start off our Saturday today. As we start a dialogue in terms of enough rhetoric, as well as what are the concrete steps that we can take to actually move the continent forward, and to not just talk shop in conferences like these. So I think the one thing that stood out for me in your keynote address was Africa for Africans and Africans by themselves, and what it means to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, especially when it comes to the business sphere and especially when it comes to intra-African investment. But as you mentioned, there isn't much of that taking place in the continent right now. So for me, my question is, why is it that African businesses, why is it that African businessmen and women are not investing
in Africa? Is it because we don't have enough of the wealth to go around? Is it because there's not enough black businessmen and black businesswomen to go around in comparison to what you would say maybe 80% of the world's wealth still remains in the West, still remains in white hands?
I think it's a number of issues. Again, it goes to mindset, and I'll say something. And I may say things that people won't like, but I will say them in any event. But I think as Africans, we tend to like to be the chiefs of our own little villages, and we don't allow room for collaboration. For me, I think it's quite interesting that you have, I'll use South Africa again as an example. South Africa's renewable energy program attracted investment from foreign-owned companies, yet you had people like Wale Tunube who are already in the space, the energy space, Dangote, etc., who could have easily taken up equity stakes in those positions. But the thought, when I spoke to some of these people and said, why didn't you guys invest? The thought had never really occurred in terms of investing inwards to another part of the continent. I don't think it's a matter of access to funding. I believe there's a lot of funding in the world for the right projects. I just think it's a matter of changing our mindset. So when Africans tend to think of collaboration, it's between ourselves and an international counterpart, not between ourselves and another African. That needs to change if we're actually going to have, how can I say it, an organized force. We're not organized. We operate in silos, and that needs to change.
And I guess it's worthy to mention the point about foreign direct investment and aid in Africa, and how much of that has, to a large extent, been to the detriment of African states. And also investment by Western companies has, for some people would argue that it has not really been beneficial in terms of projects that are invested into Africa and also by multinational corporations. In this regard, with the aid debate and FDI investment, what is your take in terms of cutting aid dependency within African states and what it would take for African states, governments, and businesses to be self-reliant and independent?
Okay, so I'll go back to Thomas Sankara, who is an intellectual crush of mine, I must say, because I just think he got this right at an earlier stage, but we just didn't follow through as a continent. He was trying at that time to remove us from this debt cycle that we find ourselves in, this aid cycle. And he believed as well that we could be self-reliant and self-sufficient. The issue is this. Foreign aid isn't just a nicely wrapped gift that comes without strings attached. When someone gives you money, they're also advancing their own objectives. So a prime example, Power Africa, which says we are trying to power the continent, and light up Africa. But if you want to access Power Africa money, you must have a US technology partner. There are strings attached. So until we begin to see that no one is going to come and save us, and that we are our own, knights in shining armor, we are going to continue and repeat the cycle where we continue a system of being indebted, where we continue a system of selling out the best of our continent. So these companies come in. Remember, this isn't their home. They have not got a long-term investment strategy. It's about maximizing return for shareholders and exiting when the asset is no longer viable. What are we left with? And I'm not asking that as an outsider. I'm asking myself as well and saying, where do we actually get to a stage where we are developing the technology that we don't need the outside investment? So right now, obviously, we haven't got that skill set. But what are we doing to actually move it forward? Instead of saying, we've got great engineers, we've got great scientists, we've got the people. Obviously, our people are working in some of the top companies in the world. We are obviously intellectually capable. But what are we doing to harness keeping those people in our continent so that We are no longer looking to a Total as an energy or a SunPower as an energy partner in our transactions. I'm now looking to Nokolo with her own engineering team and her own expertise to partner up with us. So yeah.
I want to delve a bit into the energy sector in South Africa, and during former President Jacob Zuma's reign as president.
Let me drink some water.
Have some water. Eskom was meant to sign about 27, to work with 27 independent power producers in the country, which, however, was halted because of the nuclear deal, which was about $100 billion. And I can imagine that such a halt in policy change, as well as a decision taken by an executive, puts a lot of strain for independent power producers. But also, how were you able to navigate that time with your own company in light of these policy changes?
It was a very dark period, I must say, particularly for our sector, because let me give you an example. We had about 5 ministers of energy in a space of 2 years. How do you implement policy when the head of policy is always changing? Getting anything done was an absolute nightmare. All of a sudden, energy became the new cookie jar that everyone wanted to raid because they saw that there was money. And people were upset that they hadn't gotten involved in renewables because they thought it was a tree-hugging experiment that no one was going to really benefit from. So it was a very difficult time that halted investment. However, I will always play devil's advocate. As much as we were frustrated by Zuma's administration, the one thing that was relevant in the discourse at the time was about the increased black ownership in these companies. So they were pushing for 51% black ownership in these companies moving forward. And that's something the new Minister of Energy has taken up again. But again, for me, the issue is not only about ownership. The issue is about, are we creating real companies that can be innovative in this space? Or are we allowing multinationals to continue to do what they do just with the black partner? That's more important. Yeah.
Before I open up to the floor, you mentioned 51% ownership in terms of businesses in South Africa. I'm very interested to know from your perspective, having been a black woman, aiming to be the best in the world, and getting into a sector which has historically been very much male and historically been white. How you and your company have been able to navigate that space, especially in South Africa, I would say, where inequality is very high. We are the first in the world when it comes to our Gini coefficient, which speaks volumes in terms of the fact that inequality still runs along racial lines.
Notola would be lying to you if I would say it was easy. But I learned something. And I'm going to give you guys practical business advice, not just the political advice of saying what. You need to be in a position of power in order to be able to begin to fight. You know, there's that saying, because I am young enough to understand, why are you hating outside of the club when you can't even get in? Let me put it that way. If you're outside of the room, outside of the conversation, you're not inside of the room having the conversation, they'll never let you in. Strategy number one, they mustn't see you coming. And that's the first thing I did. I'll always say that being underestimated is your most powerful tool in business. If people see you as powerful, if people see you as competent, if people see you as a threat, they will not give you a seat. So I was strategic in how I played my cards, because I had been, in the first law firm I worked in, I'd been the rebel leader where I rounded up all the trainee attorneys and said, we're being oppressed, let's join forces, let's tell this firm this is not what we're going to tolerate. Then when it came to the senior partner meeting, all my colleagues had left me there alone to take the fall. But what I'm trying to say is that the lessons learned were organize when you're inside. Don't have this idea of being the only one at the table. Women, black people, don't want to be the only black at the dinner table. Don't want to be the only woman at the table. Don't be proud of that, because if you have one seat in a boardroom, they will always outvote you. So make sure you're opening the door and you're strategically placing people. So that's how I navigated the space. I made sure I surrounded myself with very powerful partners outside of my space, being the DFIs, being government, and I didn't know anyone. I didn't come from any political influence, but I made sure that I was excellent and they wanted to invest in me. Because you need collaborators. No one arrives at a destination alone. So that's what I did. I made sure that I had people who believed in me enough and wanted to see me win, so that when the fights are happening, which they are even now, they're happening right now because we want more control. Like I said to you earlier in the speech, that we're not playing as DLO, we're coming for everything. We are coming for it and we're being unapologetic and we want majority stakes. So we're not going to sit back and be a minority partner anymore. So when you do that, you create a lot of friction because you're trying to change the power dynamic and you're not going to have a lot of friends. But you need friends outside of your group to support you. Yeah.
I'm sure there are a number of questions buzzing from the audience. We will take two, is that fine with you?
Yep.
2 questions per round, and then open it up again. Are there any questions to begin? I will take a hand from Fadzai.
My name is Fadzai. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I practice as an advocate there, and I teach property law at the University of Zimbabwe. So a lot of what you said was really interesting. However, the evidence of Zimbabwe, especially in as far as control over resources goes, is a little bit damning in as far as the African story going forward, and as far as control and ownership of assets and resources is concerned. Especially when I know you are focusing on energy, but I think some of what you're saying can be transferred to the question of land. The evidence is just not positive at all in Zimbabwe. Even when you look at indigenization, 51% ownership, it's not really translating into the results of, a great empowerment story. So my question is, how sophisticated is our plan as Africans, especially Black Africans, to control our resources? Are we ready to do so? And are our methods sound?
I will take another hand from the gentleman over there, Jason.
Thanks. My name is Jason. I'm a Zimbabwean and South African human rights lawyer. I shared that commercial firm with Linda quite a long time ago. It's amazing to see what's become of you since then, but we're both in different places. A lot of what you said resonated with me, but I want to challenge you on one aspect. You referred to a group of African billionaires, including Dangote. You mentioned Dangote as our pride and joy. You mentioned Masiwa and others. Should we really be valorizing that kind of wealth on that scale and setting these people up as our mentors when inequality is growing so drastically in Africa and in the world? It's just one aspect that I want to push back on.
Okay. I was exiled in Zimbabwe, so I know it very well. No, it's not a problem. Loved it. Love Zimbabwe. I know where you're coming from, but I want to challenge you. Why do you think someone else is better to manage your land than yourself?
I don't think so. And I just wanted to say, are we ready? So it's not just a question of taking over the land, but it's about preparation, being absolutely prepared in terms of your psyche, your legal framework, the capacity of your farmers or your energy holders, your corporate system. The whole thing has to be ready for the takeover.
But who is actually doing the work on the land now? So we're having this debate. So I know what you're saying, but I don't have a filter, so I'll speak honestly. I will speak very honestly. I was actually with a friend of mine 2 days ago, Nyasha, and she was saying people in Zimbabwe are up in arms with, I don't know how to pronounce the current president, Mnangagwa, what he's saying when he says, I know they call him the crocodile, yeah, but in any event, they're saying that they're upset that he is saying Zimbabwe is open for business. And when he says that, he's talking about foreign business, right? And people are saying, yes, we hated Mugabe, but we have no issue with what he was trying to do with land. So we're not trying to get back to where we were in terms of that. You are right, there are issues, there are flaws. There's a readiness, like you say. But for me, I think if you look at who actually plows the land, if you look at who actually maintains those farms, it's not white people. And I'm not being racist or anything. I'm just saying it. The labor remains black. So why is it that we do not trust ourselves to do the right thing? Where you may ask is the business model, because agriculture is a very difficult business model, and you need to know what you're doing, okay? But I don't think, even in South Africa, we're having this debate now, and the EFF spokesperson was speaking with the head of the business day, and he said something dismissive like, do Africans even want the land? Most Africans don't care about the land. They'd rather be off, in suburbia somewhere. I'm like, not necessarily. You understand what I'm trying to say? There may be there are, in my group of friends, let me give you an example. I know about 10 who have bought farms, black, young people like myself in their 30s, and who are running successful commercial farms. So it is possible. But I do get where you are coming from in asking, are we going to do it right this time? But remember what happened in Zimbabwe was also political. Was the land being given to the right people or political cronies? I'm asking for a system that is fair, equitable, and giving to people who actually have the skill set to do so. But to say we don't have the skill set and the readiness, I'd have to disagree. Oh yes, Jason, I remember you now. And yeah, no, sorry, it came to me, so you know what. In terms of the glorification of these people, let me say something. Whenever, and I find it very interesting, and it happens in South Africa as well, and someone actually said this, whenever it is a black person who comes from poverty being rich, it is problematic. Why? Why are we made to feel like we shouldn't want things, we shouldn't want wealth, we shouldn't want to be number one? No one is asking Bill Gates, no one is asking Jeff Bezos. Do you know the wealth of the world, and we all know it is controlled by 4 men? The inequality is there, but no one is harping on about them. But whenever Dangote takes the spotlight, and I will say, for me, he is a representation of excellence. He is a representation of black excellence. Not because necessarily I care about amassing wealth for myself, but I want my children, myself. I'm pushing because I see that there is a man who is capable, a man who looks like me, that is capable, who is from Africa, that is capable. And it's not, I think that the key thing should be about, it's not about the money, it's about putting the continent on the map. And if you meet him, and I have met him, he's really not a showy person. He's really a humble person who doesn't own properties overseas like our foreign, our political leaders who have apartments in London, etc. And he has every right to. He has the money. It's his money. He hasn't stolen it. But what I'm trying to say is that I do have a problem a bit when it now comes, because I come from poverty, I'm not allowed to reach the top. No, I want to reach the top so that the people behind me are inspired to do the same. In terms of addressing inequality, look at what his foundation is doing on the continent. He is doing a lot. So I don't know, Jason, but I do get the broader question which you're asking is that let's leave race aside. If we're looking at the richest men, let's say regardless of black or white, is this something we should be celebrating? It disgusts me that there's only is it 4 people that own the wealth of the world? And I'm just like, can't you just redistribute that wealth? So for me, it was never necessarily about money, but it's about excellence. And unfortunately, somehow, the money goes together with the excellence. If you understand what I'm trying to say, I wish it could be different, but it's not. But I'm just saying, when it comes to black people, let's not always be harsh and say that, why are you having wealth when you come from poverty? Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. We'll take another set of questions from the audience. The gentleman at the front and
That guy has been...
Josh at the back. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Maheshwar from India. Obviously, as you can see, I'm one of the very few Indians attending Africa conference. What brings me to this conference is I have always been interested in Africa since my first geography book lesson in Africa, when I fell in love with Africa. Okay, my question to you is, I have been listening to several beautiful speakers, including your fascinating speech on what Africa can do together, do for itself, and indigenization of things, technology, and I guess you are doing great in terms of evolving and innovating technologies. But my question is basically me as a stakeholder. I come from a very interesting background of clinical psychology, then into public health and global health. So my question is basically, how can we pursue common solution to common problems that we have faced as a humanity? And what role can we actually play in terms of acting together for solving problems? Because I see there are many problems that we face similarly in our context, be it India, Africa, Latin America, or in any other developing economy or LMICs. So do you trust us enough? And do we have that trust and understanding and fellow feeling of humanity that we can act together and help each other be a part of each other's life? That's my question to you. Thank you.
Okay. Josh.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see two South Africans moderating this, and a fantastic speech. Again, I want to push back just a bit with regards to capitalism. I think that you're very critical of African leaders as well as foreign investment, as well as particularly white capital. But to me, capital really is colorblind. I mean, the four countries with the most billionaires in the world: India, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, and China. There was no real critique of the China factor in Africa. Is this a neo-colonialist power? They aren't white. How do Africans then relate to other power blocks that don't, or perceivably aren't Western? You spoke a lot about the oppressor, us, them, etc. Is this anyone who isn't African? Who are these people? Who are these entities to you? Thank you.
Okay, good question. To start with the first question about can we work together, if I understood, because you're saying that there's a shared commonality with the problems of the world, especially, let's say, developing world. I think there needs to be collaboration. You're not going to get anywhere if you go it alone. It's as simple as that. We don't collaborate enough on the continent. We don't collaborate enough amongst ourselves as developing nations. We do have the BRICS, and there's been a bit of movement there, but I don't think it's going on. I don't know. I would have expected a lot more by now, and you are right, especially India and South Africa, given the ties between the two countries. I know there are some economic exchanges here and there being supported through the DTI between the two countries, and exchanges in terms of knowledge base. But again, I do agree with you. I don't think I have more to add than we need a lot more of that, and that's how we're going to change. Josh, when you talked about why I didn't go on, let me start with why I didn't critique the new colonial powers, China, etc. It wasn't because I've dismissed them. Actually, the partners we have on our wind projects are Chinese, and I'm fighting a war. So I definitely am aware and conscientized to that fact. When I talk us and them, I talk about people who, I mean, if you identify as African, then this is an us and them. It's a continental-based thing. For me, the talk is more about how can we as Africans begin to own the means of production and to begin to own ourselves. So whoever is opposed to that, it's not a racial thing. If you're an African, if you identify as an African, you want to see us propel on this continent and own ourselves instead of always having outsiders, whether they be from China, whether they be from the West, reaping the benefit of our resources, our skills, and our land and our opportunity, and leaving nothing there in a true sense of the word. So the us and them is those who are opposed to our progression, because there is a movement that is benefiting from seeing us like this. There are global corporations that have created wars on this continent because it benefits them for us to be in a state of war. You understand what I'm trying to say? So that is the us and them. I'm not talking in racial lines because we come from South Africa, it tends to be always like a black and white thing. No, it's not only a black and white thing. As the same way I felt about the Guptas, as the same way I felt about Zuma's administration, that is the same way I feel in general. Anyone who is against us winning is against us. That's what I mean.
Thank you so much. We will take one last set of questions from the audience. Mokhtar and Yolanda, please do make it brief.
Okay, my question is quite simple. I just wanted to know your thoughts on... All right. So you mentioned Rhodes House and kind of the issues surrounding the dinner being there. But my question to you was more about reclamation. So I'm a master's student here doing African studies, but I do feel as though Oxford, in its kind of foundation, even in its existence, is quite imperialist, as we all know. Everywhere you go, I see a painting of an old white man that I don't know, what he did or of anything. But what I'm saying is that the idea surrounding that is that our environment is quite colonial. So I just wanted to know, what were your thoughts on reclamation? If someone was to say, I'm a Rhodes Scholar, but, I'm taking this back from something that was taken from me and I'm going to use it to get a really brilliant education out of it from, even though he was evil, I know that, but the point is that I'm asking.
My name is Mokhtar, and thank you, Linda, for this very passionate and insightful kind of keynote address. My question is particularly related to your point about inequality and how we see black example. If you go back to post-colonial Africa, you see through the independence struggles, people who were actually influential, like yourself, sit down on the table and kind of address that we need to win this independence. But evidence shows political independence at the top has not translated into political independence for the masses. And we continue to see that happen. How do economic independence, which I tell you seem to be preaching, will again translate to economic independence for the masses? Thank you.
Okay, the first question is, I spoke to my husband before coming here. So I was telling him about how he's from Nigeria. So there's always this thing, he doesn't get this race dynamic having grown up in South Africa. So he says to me, but you knew you were going to Oxford, right? And you knew you were going to, so what can be your problem? What can do you, which is broken, what's your issue? And I said, I knew it on a piece of paper in history, but to experience it, I was actually surprised at my own discomfort. I have to say, I wasn't expecting, I actually even changed what I was going to say based on what happened last night. Not because the students or anyone, it was a beautifully organized dinner, there was nothing wrong. I just think the evocation of the emotion in me, how I felt in that room, came over me. So when you say we are reclaiming the money, first of all, it's our money. It's not Rhodes' money, okay? It's our money. You see, I know. But what I'm saying is it's like how I refuse to do Afrikaans in school. I refuse to call the name of the oppressor and say I'm a Rhodes Scholar. Do you understand? I'm saying in a way, psychologically, we are still elevating his name by saying like to say I'm a scholar of, and then to put Mandela Rhodes doesn't clean it up. It doesn't clean it up. But what I'm saying is, it's not a you problem as the students and recipients. I am proud of all of you, Rhodes Scholars. I am in awe of all of you. You are the future. What I am saying is, it is our fault. It is us in business. We should be doing more. And I will make sure, I will declare today, I will rise, make sure I've got enough money to send at least 100 of you guys here and have it be a DLO scholarship so that you guys no longer knock on the Rhodes door. You understand? So that should be the goal as African business. We're not in it, for me anyway, it's not about making money just for myself. It's about money goes with the power to change the narrative. So as much as we're saying we're reclaiming it, why haven't they changed the name? We could easily change the name. You know, it's our money. And then no, truly, I mean, it's built on our backs. But in any event, on these, just to summarize, on what you were saying, how do we translate economic liberation to the people on the ground? It hasn't really translated. It hasn't really translated because I do think that there are many amongst us who want to be rich for our own selfish means and want to achieve success for our own selfish means. I think once we change our mindset on why you're in business, granted, you make your first million, you make your first 2 million, it's exciting and all of that. But if money is the motivator, you shouldn't really be in business, for me in any event. Because if money is your sole motivator, you will never have enough. You will never be satisfied. I think it should be about the transformation of economies and lives. And the person who put this very well, funny enough, was the CEO of Bidvest. South Africans, help me out here. I forget his name. Brian Joffe. When I met him at the Africa Business Leadership Awards, he said to me, you know, Linda, I asked him, you know, how does it feel to run such, I mean, it's one of the top companies in South Africa. How does it feel to run such a massive company? And he said to me, you know, Linda, it's a huge responsibility. If you take into account that my company employs the size of, let's say, the entire Mpumalanga province, my failure has an impact not only on my employees, their spouses, their children, and all those who they support. When you look at it that way, when you look at business that way, that it is a responsibility, you are in a leadership position, you cannot fail. So if you look at it that way, you want to know that I left something that others benefited from. That is the true success of being in business, not whether I drive a Maserati or a Ferrari or I own the entire Chanel shop. It is about how many people have you educated, how many people have you empowered, what have you actually done. So, yeah.
We'll unfortunately have to close the session, but Linda, I want to thank you so much, firstly, for honoring this invitation to speak, and also for speaking a lot of truth to power, I think, in your keynote address. Much needed dialogue, but also much needed honesty in terms of where we are as Africans, as well as providing your own perspective. And so I want to say thank you, and for those of you who would like to interact more with Linda, she will be joining us in one of the panel sessions as well, and we'll be here for the conference. So thank you so much, and we look forward to being with you for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nokola. Thank you so much, Linda, for that insightful and thought-provoking speech and the conversation that you have. And thank you so much to the delegates who asked very thoughtful questions. At this point in time, there is two things I wanted to say. So we'll be breaking up into 4 separate sessions after this. And the first session that we'll be breaking up into is the session on curbing unconstitutional change of government, through constitutionalism and citizen movements. And I think over since yesterday and in the speech that was delivered by President Addo, this has been set up nicely. The scene has been set up nicely for her to sort of have those in-depth conversations on constitutionalism. The second session is building our own African brands, and you've already talked about how we can build institutions that are African, authentic African, but that are also able to be exported across globally. The other session is on feminism. This is an issue that has been talked about a lot in Africa, but we feel it's not being brought up to the level that it should be discussed, but also acting upon it. So we're going to have a separate session to talk about feminism in Africa. And I'm glad that there is a lot of representation among Africans, and seeing this session being conducted with 2 South African black women is the kind of action that we want to have, not only in this conference, but also moving forward. And the last session that we will be having is a session on disrupting the digital industry. And to set us up for discussion on disrupting the digital industry, we are going to have a short presentation from Wave. And I'd like to call upon one of our colleagues and partners, Taryn Mackenzie-Moore, to talk to us about their work Wave. Because as you might choose, set up the scene nicely, but from the diaspora and us making those remittances to Africa, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done in terms of disrupting that industry. And Taryn will be able to talk about that. So after this presentation, we can go for a 20-minute break, and then we'll call you upon into the different sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Jeffrey, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Taryn Mackenzie-Moore, and I am the head of growth at Wave. Before joining Wave, I was also a student here, and so it's lovely to be back at Oxford. Wave's mission, simply put, is to radically reduce the cost of sending remittances to Africa. According to the World Bank, at the beginning of 2018, the average cost to send money to Africa was 9%, whereas the global average was only 7%. Well, that's still very high, but comparatively less expensive. And so the way that we're doing that is by partnering with mobile money service providers across the continent. Our app, since 2014, has allowed East Africans in the US, UK, and Canada to send money instantly into mobile wallets in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Because we've eliminated the need for agents and brick and mortar money transfer locations, we're able to reduce the cost of sending money to those countries by over 70%. And in addition to the fact that our service is significantly less expensive than traditional money transfer companies like Western Union and MoneyGram, we've seen in the various corridors in which we operate, as soon as we begin to grow a significant user base, the traditional money transfer companies bring down their prices. So we are driving down the cost of sending remittances in each of these corridors. And so we, in October, launched transfers to Ghana, are piloting transfers to Nigeria, and this summer intend to launch transfers from France to a number of French-speaking West African countries. And so my purpose for being here today is not just to talk about our accomplishments as a way of making myself feel better about what we do, but in order to achieve our goal of radically bringing down the cost of sending money to Africa, we will have to grow our team. So we are recruiting for a number of positions in engineering, finance, and the growth team, and I would love to speak to any of you throughout the course of the day. Please come find me, and I'd love to talk about any of those opportunities. Wave is now the largest money transfer service from the US to East Africa, and we're comprised of a team of 20 engineers and operations people from finance sectors in places like Kenya, Ghana, Google, Uber, and we're very keen to continue to expand throughout the continent. So thank you very much for having me today, and I hope to speak to you throughout the rest of the day. Thank you.
So just a quick housekeeping stuff. Can we just please, when we're coming into this lecture room, just not bring the open teacups in here, just because of the electrical gadgets in here. If there's any spillage, it's going to cause a bunch of issues. So if you're coming in, come in with the closed lid coffee cups if you can. And for the sessions that we're breaking into now, the first session is right in here. This is lecture room 1. Lecture theater 1, and that's room A. So that's here, and that's curbing the unconstitutional changes of government. The next one, which is in lecture room 2, is to the left. So if you go out to the left, that's where the next one is. The third and the fourth are straight ahead. Lecture room